Great. So let me introduce you to Juliana. She's the founder of Scale Time. And what she does is she helps clients actually scale. And she was really big, huge like impact on my business, because as we were getting more facilitators, I had to actually have systems and replicate myself. And that was really hard because I didn't think anybody could replicate me. I was like, no, I'm a special unicorn. And then she's like, no, there's patterns to everything. So what she allowed me to do is actually really just start scaling the business and seeing how people like can manage and facilitate owners up. And then also having that before, when you create systems, you have happier clients, things run smoother, and you have metrics for everything. So, all right, take it, Juliana.
All right, cool. So here we go. Today we are talking about onboarding clients. And as you know, when you have a couple of clients, you may just kind of wing it. And as you start getting more and more clients, that winging it does not work as well as we'd like it to. And the thing that I just really want to impress upon you guys is onboarding. I almost call it like the ugly stepchild of processes. Like no one really cares about it as much until, you're like, oh, wow, that's really valuable. And you really start seeing it when you start to manage a lot of different, like more accounts. You start seeing more volume because how you manage those accounts directly correlates to how you're onboarding those people. And I'll talk a little bit about more of that later. And I always like to say, in terms of like, what we're really doing is like, sometimes you feel like, okay, well, I don't really need systems, or maybe like things are working or you're winging it or whatever. But then when you start to think about volume, it's like, okay, well then what happens if you had 5 clients next week? Would you be able to onboard them? What about 20 clients or 50 clients? And that's where we really start to see that systems, become so much more valuable as we start to be able to handle like more and more volume. All right, so for today, we're going to be talking about specifically setting up expectations, what kickoffs are and why they're important, and why does onboarding actually help us increase retention. And I know that I left Q&A at the end, but I would much rather you guys interrupt me and ask me questions along the way than me just, kind of talk at the camera. That's just much more fruitful for me. So, just jump in right ahead. All right. So I always think about onboarding from a conceptual point, like going through TSA. I don't know. How many of you guys travel? All right. I love to travel. So when you go through TSA, it's kind of a pain in the butt, right? Like you have to get on this line, you have to like take off your shoes and take off your laptop and, have all your little bottles and 4 ounces and all of that good stuff. And it's really a pain, but what it allows for is a happy, safe journey to your destination, right? So you go through it because you know that you have to go through these steps and it's going to allow for a better journey. Now, every once in a while, I get a smart ass asking me, well, what if you've got TSA pre-check, right? Like, don't you get to zoom through that line? And then I get to say, as a global entry member, yes, you do get to zoom through the line, but you had to do something prior, right? You had to pay more. You had to put in the time. You had to do a special application, right? So there's some ways that you can kind of go through that line speedily, but there was something else that you had to pay in for. So in general, we can think about onboarding as going through TSA. You got to take those steps. All right, for you guys, and there's an onboarding checklist. If you want to take a look at it later on, it's bit.ly onboarding checklist, and I will send that to Tanya as well. So, everything that I'm going to talk about here, we can recap later, and you can, be able to tick it off. And that way, if you have any questions, just let me know. All right, so thinking about your client experience, right? So if we think about onboarding as this happy journey, as this happy experience, why would we even spend time or money on it? Like why would we want to cultivate that? And this is just a really amazing statistic that is that as when you think about your marketing budget or when you think about, your business development budget, it's so much more easier to retain clients that are already happy, right? Like to have clients to give you more money when they're already giving you money. As anyone knows, to go through a sale is is hard, right? Like, you have to do your lead gen, you have to figure it out. Like, you got to get people to commit, you got to get people to sign contracts. Like, every step along the way costs you money. And so to be able to retain clients for longer, is way more efficient, and it's way more cost effective, and your revenues increase, right? So people who, this was a study done, I want to say it was done by Bain and Company, where they took a look at companies that took 20% of their client acquisition, right? And they just moved 10% over the client experience and managing accounts, and they saw revenues increase of 200%, because happy clients stay with you longer and they refer you other people. So that single user, that single client actually can grow your business a lot more. So that's why this becomes even more important. Now, let's talk about what happens when you don't onboard your clients. So I'm gonna leave it to the team. What do you guys, like when you don't have proper onboarding, what does that look like in your world? I think you guys are on mute, so feel free to unmute yourselves.
They don't know their expectations. They're like, what are we doing? What's next? When are we, they're just lost.
Yeah. Anything else that happens?
Well, a lot of confusion ensues if you don't have everything laid out and in a orderly manner. And even in your own internal systems, if you don't have things set up properly, the things that you need, then it just makes your whole process more time consuming. So there has to be some systems set up so when a new client comes in, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G happen off the bat, regardless of who the client is, because those things are always there. And then the part that I'm a little weaker on is what do I need to give to, what's the A, B, C, D, E, F, G that I need to give the client, so we set those expectations right up at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. What about you, Nina? You got furry brow. No. I can't hear you. Okay. All right. So I don't know. I think you're on mute, but it's okay. But just take a look at it, right? So one of the things is that sometimes we're stuck with legacy clients and we don't, which is, and sometimes these clients may be great and they're awesome. And sometimes they could be like the biggest pains in the asses because we took them on when we were like, we had to, we needed cash flow. And they're not accustomed to any new sort of, rules of the game that we're putting in place for new clients. We get stuck with unreasonable requests. Sometimes there's project delays, right? People that are on our team, especially if we have a flexible team with, freelancers or contractors or part-time staff, right? Like they're not really like what's going on with the client, right? So that back and forth, that communication gets like, poorly behaved clients, right? And then also being able to go from sales to production, right? That's that point, right? Where you're producing or you're fulfilling on the client from the sales, like that passing of information, you can't really do it, right? That's what I call passing the baton, which makes it really, really difficult. And then again, PITA clients, that's my version of saying pain in the ass. Because like we all know what that feels like. And we're like, the expectations weren't set. So what can we take away? Because, I could talk about onboarding for like a week, but I won't subject you guys to that. And we only have a couple of minutes, but 80-20, like what is the most important thing about onboarding? I would have to say it's setting expectations. This is the most important thing, right? Like what are your boundaries in your business? What are your communication guidelines? Like, do you want people to email you, text you, chat you, G-chat you? Right? Like what's appropriate, what's not? Who will contact your team? So sometimes you're in the sales process and you're talking to the business owner, or maybe you're talking to a director, depending on who you're dealing with, or you're talking to a certain executive account. And they had the authority to sign and everything like that. And then all of a sudden, a new head pops up and you're like, whoa, who is this? Who am I dealing with? Or 5 heads pop up. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I'm dealing with a lot of different people on that team. So really understanding like, who is it that you're dealing with? And who is on your team that's also dealing with that, right? Because part of onboarding internally, as Jonathan, as you had mentioned, is also like sourcing who on your team is going to be best qualified to fulfill on that particular client or that account. What happens when they don't show up, right? So this is something that I get a lot of with clients who deal with bigger clients. They might be doing a campaign for them, or they might be doing production for them, and then they have set meetings, and those meetings get brushed off. So, are we incentivizing them in a really positive manner to be at the meetings? Are we just charging ahead because we're like, hey, you didn't do that meeting, I could still continue without your opinion because I have all the information I need? Or does your production stop? Do you get penalized? What are your different options for when people don't show up? Like, how necessary is that? And then feedback loops or iterations, right? Or version control. If you're doing marketing or asset creation, or, how much information do you need from the client to review before you're going back, right? So how much is that that you need before you're able to charge ahead? So, thinking about this, and now, some of them might think, some people are like, oh, well, I have a very lengthy scope of work, and my scope of work outlines everything that they possibly need to know. And this is what I call client amnesia. Client amnesia happens throughout the entire life cycle of the client. They don't remember, so they need to be iterated. And you can almost think about setting expectations as like collateral or like an insurance policy, right? Down the future, when they do things that don't necessarily, that they're kind of like weaning and they're behaving poorly, you want to be able to bring them back, right? Another thing that I hear from clients that say, it's like, well, why do I have to write all this crap? Like, why am I sending them more information? They're not going to read it. And I'm like, it's true. 80% of the time, they don't read the expectations. But what's awesome is that it's in writing. So when they try to get back off the beaten path, you can resend them that email that you originally sent them. And you're like, hey, do you remember when when I sent you this, blah, 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 here are the expectations. And you get to sort of condition your clients from the get-go. So they're not able to go off the beaten path. All right, so that's really around like setting expectations. So if you guys get anything out of today, the most important thing, 80-20, is setting expectations. I'm going to say one more thing about this. Hours of operation. So when we're doing setting expectations with my clients, people often cringe around the idea of like hours of operations, because now it feels like, oh, like you're like legit, or like, oh, it feels corporate-y, right? There's something that's a little bit icky around it. But it's so important, because how many people have ever tried, like, you go to the bank at 5:02. Do they open the doors? No, they don't open the doors. Like, you're, and you know that. Now, obviously, it depends on where you are in the stage of your business, but it's important to at least set the norm. If you choose to deviate from the norm, that's up to you, depending on where you are. But at least you've set the norm and you've set the standard. All right, guys. Let me see. It's being funky. All right, so how we onboard, right? So we often think about onboarding as this singular thing, right? I onboarded them and poof, they're out. We're out to production. Yay. We got the money. So we're really excited about onboarding, because it means we've got money in hand and we're ready to work. However, that doesn't always mean that the work that we're going to do is the best that we can do. Because one thing, so we talked a little bit about setting expectations. I'll talk about doing kickoffs and what that means. So kickoffs are usually like, yes, some kind of start to your agreement, right? There's either a phone call, a meeting, a gathering. We can go into what this looks like, but to really gather all of the information and make sure that we've crossed our I's and dotted our T's, Okay, I never do that right, but right. So and make sure that we have everything, because what happens is you get into production and then you're like, oh, I need those credentials, or what was their FTP, or their ad, they said something during the, they gave me an ad spend during sales, and then they gave me a different ad spend during this time, or Nina, if they're doing production, they're like, I wanted 10 testimonials and I really want 5, but I want something else. So you really want to be able to say, okay, do I have everything that I need so that I can perform in the best way that I can? Because what will happen is we don't gather all that information, and then we're stuck in our production, and and we're trying to deploy resources, whether it's contractors or freelancers or our employees, and people are waiting around for stuff, and that waiting around costs us money. Right. And we can say like, oh, well, it's the client's fault. They didn't, give us the information, but our onboarding wasn't tight enough that we didn't get the information. Right. So, coming from that place, then it's measuring. Like, how do we know that we're doing a good job? Right. How do we actually know that we're doing a good job? And then the last thing with onboarding, as we can think about onboarding as it goes into account management, is nurturing. Right? And I'll give you guys a couple of examples around that, right? Because every step of the way, when clients are, they're having questions, right? Like you've solved their pain point, or you're starting to solve their pain point, and then all of a sudden, like whack-a-mole, more questions and more pain points and more fears and anxieties pop up. So how do we do this in a systemic manner so that we can, not be answering 20 million questions a day? All right. Now, here we go. So thinking about, okay, so what do we need? Like, what are the things that we actually need, the documents that will help us to onboard people faster, easier, and way more happily, right? So I think about this as an intake form. It can be an intake form, an intake survey. This is basically like, what are the assets that you need to do a good job, right? Like, what is it that you need? If you're a web developer, you may need like their FTP information, or you need, did they have, like, do they currently have a website? Maybe they were on Squarespace and they want to move to WordPress. Like, what is it that you need to be able to develop it? If you're in marketing, and like you're a creative and you're doing a redesign, like, do you have a style guide? Did they, like, what is it that we need in order to provide our job? So that's the intake form. Now the intake form can be, now this depends a little bit on how big your client is, right? If you have a small client, you can send them a survey, they can send you something back, that's pretty easy. If you're dealing with a team, right? Like, let's say you're dealing with an executive team, chances are they're probably not gonna fill out a form. They're gonna be like, screw you, I don't have time for this. So we still wanna be able to have everything that we need, and then we can send them stuff, like we can have them gather information, send it back to us, and then finish that off in the kickoff call. A client brief. Now, sometimes we see this called different things, but essentially, where is the place where the information that you go and you have from sales, go to onboarding, go to actual production, right? And this is so important, because there's a funny thing that happens when people pay you. It's almost, I describe this as almost like a religious moment. Like, it's almost like they've now walked into the confessional, and everything that they've told you during the sales process is left up to, it's almost arbitrary, right? Because sometimes it's true, sometimes you get, it's 100% true. And then sometimes you start hearing, well, actually that team member that I told you was going to work with us, we're about to fire him, so we might have some delays. Or, hey, that ad spend, I told you that because my boss, but we're going to we're going to either triple it, or we're going to, or we're going to cut it in half, or, this was happening to me. And like, all of a sudden, like, the confessional comes out. So we want to make sure that our information is accurate, that we actually get from the sales call. Because I always think of that as kind of like skewy information. Sometimes it's really great, but sometimes not. So we want to be able to transfer that. And then we want to know whoever's doing our production, whether it's you or a team, whatever that looks like, that we have the most up-to-date and accurate information throughout, right? So that they're able to do their job. A welcoming kit. A welcome kit is really important. So a welcome kit quote unquote kit, can be anything from an email to actually something that you send them out to, videos are being used a lot right now, like, hey, welcome to this, this and that place. I always think that, however you are welcoming someone into the organization for the first time, it's got to be really positive. And, and one of the tricks that I always use is make sure that you're going to put in a testimonial or something there, because the first thing that once people pay you, the first concern that they have is, was this the right decision? Like, I paid you, like, oh crap, but I could have paid that money in marketing. I could have paid that money to get this person. I could have paid that money, right? So you want to remind them that, yes, they made the right decision, right? Like, this is an affirmation, we're so excited to work with you. And yes, you made the right decision. And then how will you be measuring client performance, right? Now, for some of you, it might be very, very easy, right? Like, if you're doing a marketing campaign, you're gonna be like, okay, well, the campaign is doing this, right? But you wanna make sure that your expectations and their expectations line up, right? Sometimes you're doing a marketing campaign for someone and you're like, oh my God, the CPL is this, and this is so great, and da-da-da. But they're a public figure, and what they really care is more about branding and how many people they're reaching and their audience, right? And so we wanna think about, okay, are we aligned, right? At least internally and externally. And are we measuring client performance so that we know that we're delivering the best results? And setting them up for that. Now, it could be as easy as doing reporting, if you're that lucky. If not, how are you making sure that they know that you are delivering the results up to your standard and also to their expectations? Because those two things can, sometimes can mean very, very different things depending on the client and your team. All right, kicking off. So kicking off is, it can be really, really simple as, if you're doing, let's say, SEO and you've got a ton of clients and like you just don't have time, like you can send them a video and say, like, here's your account, this is what it looks like, do you have any questions, send them to me. So kickoff can be that simple. It could be a 10-minute phone call of saying, hey, let's say you're dealing with a single business owner, no big team, like it's really easy. It can be, hey, I got all of your information. I'm missing X, Y, and Z. Can you send it to me by, Tuesday? And is there anything else that I need to know? Do you have any questions, right? So the kickoff is really to get you guys on the same page and have any questions that you can do, or also, set them up. Tanya, I know sometimes she would back in the good old days or the past days, sometimes she'd set people up at the very, very beginning with some kind of structure. So, that could be a kickoff, just to be thinking about that. As you get bigger, you want to be able to make your kickoffs still, hold true to the individual, but make it as efficient as possible, because by now, the things that fall through the cracks and you're able to get them much, much more faster. So what do you really need for a kickoff? An agenda, like some kind of idea of like, what is it that I'm doing? Now, you might have kickoffs that are like 3 hours long. Let's say you're doing a $100,000 like web development project, and you might be meeting with a team, and you might be doing like all of the creative stuff, and you might have a 3-hour kickoff. So you want to be able to create an agenda, know who's in the room. You want to be able to eliminate any doubt, right? Because they've chosen you. They've given you money. They now confide in you. They trust you. You want to be able to answer any questions, and you want to be able so that one day when you're not doing the kickoff yourself, that you have it structured so that somebody else could perform the kickoff, right? Whether that's an account manager or marketing lead, a lead, right? You want to be able to have your kickoff so that somebody else can do it, so that you're no longer tied to the client anymore. All right. Post kickoff. So what do we do after the kickoff? This is a great time to recap and educate the client. I'm really, really big on educating the client, because we have a lot of differences of sophistication, right? Sometimes you have clients that, they know too much, We're like, oh my God, they're very, very sophisticated, and, they ask us all these questions and they keep us on their toes, and they make sure that we grow, which is awesome. Like, you want to be able to use that information, to always be up-leveling your own systems and your own education. And then sometimes you have clients that are not very sophisticated, and they need a lot more education. And so being able to bridge that gap allows us to have consistent systems in our educating of our clients and keeping them with us longer, because the goal is to retain them. So things that you can include in the recap of your kickoff is, any definitions. So, and I always mention this because even like the word strategy, I hear from so many different of my clients that are different marketers or like digital agencies, and they're like, yeah, they had somebody else that was doing this, and their definition of strategy was very different than mine. So something as simple as that, any toolkits. And what I mean by this is, any things that they're using that maybe your business delivers that's different. Right. So, they might need access to that, or let's say it's your reporting. You might want to give them like, what does how to read a report, or what does this report mean? And how you're measuring results. So post kickoff, this is a great time to have that additional touch point with the client. It shows that you're organized. It shows that you care. And it shows that, their best interest is at hand. All right. Then measuring. So thinking about the client, how do we make this easier for ourselves, right? And I'm really big in having either checklists or workflows, however you want to call them, in your project manager, so that you can easily know that nothing fell through the cracks as you were onboarding them, right? So you're able to say, okay, this is what I need to onboard this client. I'm going to check these things off and make sure that it's doing. What's great about this is that once you have a system in place, you can start to delegate that system and then optimize it, right? So somebody else can check off these things. You no longer have to do this. We're able to pass the onboarding baton. So that is the most exciting thing about a workflow. If I can make workflow sexy, it's all about that. I no longer have to do it. Somebody else is able to do them. So I'm like, score. Workflows, so sexy. Now, let's say they're doing the work. How do we know if it's any good work, right? Now it's about measuring performance. So, who usually does the onboarding? It's an account manager or an account manager / project manager. At the earlier stages, someone who is a lead, other than yourself, that's able to do these things. So thinking about, okay, how do we keep track of client results? And I'm big on creating scorecards, so that once you've delegated the onboarding process, that clients are being taken care of, and you're doing it in a quantifiable way, right? So whether that's like support time, or whether that's, okay, we've onboarded, 2 people last week. We've closed 2 people last week. It should mean that we're onboarding 2 people this week, right? As opposed to we closed 2 people last week and we haven't onboarded anyone. That's not a good sign. That means we're delayed, and that's quantifiably hurting us, right? Because that means that we're not able to deliver results quickly enough. And it sets the stage of like, okay, we're lagging. All right. So I love this quote. It's like, the number one reason why 95% of business owners can't sell their company is because their business is 100% dependent on them running it. So, really thinking not only about onboarding, but also delegating your onboarding as quickly as you can. All right. And then nurturing the clients. So this is sort of post kickoff. And what that looks like is really thinking about, like, what is the education that clients have throughout your engagement, right? So if it's, yeah, I'm just going to pick Nina, for example. I don't know, because I have testimonials in my mind, maybe because I did one recently for Tanya. So let's say you have a client who asked for production of testimonials, and then, and so like you produce them, great, awesome. Like you help them. Like now their question is like, great, like now, like where do I put these, right? And then maybe a separate question then is like, okay, they're on YouTube and they're on Vimeo. How do I get traffic to them, right? Like now maybe they have traffic to them. It's like, now okay, I'm up leveling my marketing. Like, how can I leverage these and, you know, and do them again, right? So people have these different stages as they go through your engagement of like, how do I do this? SEO is a lovely one at this, right? Because the first month of SEO, it's like, it's all messed up. It's like rankings are going up and down, you know, people like, and if they actually paid attention to the reports, they're going to be confused. So the first question, you know, so maybe a great content piece to send the first month of your clients is like, don't be confused by crazy rankings. This is normal. Like, you want to put them at ease, right? Like, their pain point is like, why is this happening? Or let's say you're doing ad spend. First month is research. Like, you don't necessarily want them to think that you're, you know, they're throwing their money away, but you can say something like, we're finding all these interesting things about your audience and we're calibrating, right? So, you know, really thinking about how do we ameliorate their pain, not only as the initial pain point, but as they're going through the cycle with you, so that they're staying with you, they're staying for longer, and they trust you, right? It's like every single time they trust you more and more and more. And it also allows you to create greater touch points, especially with those clients that we kind of are like set it and forget it. You know, whether we're not meeting with them as often because you're doing a campaign, or maybe like the web development is just like there. So we're able to touch point with them as well from a place of educating them, of keeping them engaged, and, you know, and it really differentiates us from the competition. So that's sort of the post onboarding that goes a little bit into client management, but I think it is pretty awesome. All right, some onboarding hacks is, as we're thinking about onboarding people or delegating the onboarding, we're like, crap, I don't have time to create the training as I'm onboarding somebody, right? I'm in it. I'm in the dirt at the same time. So something that you can do is actually take the next client that you are about to onboard and do a screencast of you actually going through the process of it. And that will help you sort of kill two birds with one stone. You're onboarding the client because you have to, and you're doing a screencast, which is creating your future training for that particular type of client. The other thing that you can do is sometimes if you have things that are really consistent, that you're sending clients at the beginning, maybe it's, you know, like, how do you get to your AdWords account? Because I need you to send it to me, or I don't know, I'm making stuff up. But, you know, it can be something that's really consistent that you send to a lot of different clients. You can put the documents someplace and then be able to provide a link to it, so that when you send them a welcome email or you send them things, you know, like you already have that standardization of documents, and then you're just sending the links. So you're making your email shorter, easier to digest, and you have consistency in your documents. And you can put that on the website, on your own website, you know, brand it, make it look like super legit. So that way it's pretty awesome. Quality surveys. So I'm a big fan of surveys. If you take a look across industries, retail actually has been going into doing surveys a lot more now, technological companies, but hospitality has been, I think, one of the best industries to have always been doing surveys. And I think we could learn a lot from that, because they're always improving their experience. And so when we think about surveys, you think about, like, after you've delivered your first milestone, whatever that looks like in your business, it's a great time to send a survey. The reason why I say first milestone is because it's enough time that they've gotten work, you know, and they know, like, whether or not they're happy with it. And then you can get some real feedback, whether it's feedback on your quality of work, feedback on your team. And you're able to really see, like, okay, you know, how can I still make them happy in the next couple of milestones that I have in the future. And so this was also something I did this, I think I did this like 6 months ago. Crystal Knows, which is this technology app, right? And what it does is that it looks at your communication styles. So you can actually go through your ideal clients and put them into Crystal Knows and see what their communication styles is. So as we're trying to deliver that external communication to our clients, and, you know, sometimes I'll have a welcome kit and it'll sound very professional because the clients are very professional. But then you have other clients that are like, you know, we're building a tribe and, like, you know, everything is awesome. Like, so it's very different. And you can, you know, really engage with the client on that, like, particular level, and you can systematize it because Crystal knows, she actually knows, which is pretty cool. And then, as always, like I mentioned before, using testimonials. People often think about testimonials as something that they use in lead generation. But I'm a big proponent of using testimonials in your onboarding because it's reinforcing that positive choice that they just made, which is huge. And all right, 12:35. Awesome. Questions?
So I was curious, would you say testimonials in the onboarding? I've never heard that before, so I'm curious to see what it is what made you think of that. And
I don't remember where I got that from. I tend to get information from a lot of different places, but I definitely saw it someplace, and it was, I forget the statistic, but it's like one of the reasons why like clients will leave you pretty quickly. Like I remember like last December, I paid a bunch of money for copywriting and I was like, this is not working. And I knew within the first month. So usually, the testimonial is just that reinforcement of like, the same reason why you would do it in lead generation. It's just reminding people that like they've made that right decision. It's reinforcing their positive decision that they've made to work with you.
Do you have an example of how you go about it? Because I think I'm still not sold on that.
On
how do you put
whatchamacallit?
Onboarding?
I put it on my onboarding email, like my initial email, and then I have a picture of a face because like that humanizes it. They're like, oh, there's other people like me, with a line around like, oh, we were able to decrease our workload by 80%.
Okay, cool.
I have a question about surveys. So people don't necessarily want to take the time to do surveys. So I'm sure that you have some thoughts on how long the survey should be, what should be included in it. So let's say you hit your first milestone. What do I want? 3 questions, 8 questions? What's the tolerance level?
Yeah, you can do it. It should be no longer than 5 minutes. Like,
5 minutes.
Yeah, no longer than 5 minutes. And so, there's ways to automate the surveys too, which is kind of cool. Like if you're using, for example, FreshBooks, like after you send them the invoice, or you can set it up for a particular invoice, it can send you a survey as well, with like 2 or 3 questions like, hey, let us know how we did on our and so that's a way that you can automate it. So people are paying the invoice and then they have to, they're answering it right away. So it's like really easy and it's quick if you're doing a 2 to 3 question thing. And you're right. Sometimes people, they don't want to do the surveys, but then it's up to you or the account manager to really put it under the context of we care about the quality and we want to make sure that we're providing the best service possible. Because sometimes people feel like they're going to do a survey and it's going to go into the ether and it doesn't matter, right? So you really have to sort of stipulate that it matters and that like changes will be made because of that survey. And then people are usually pretty candid about doing it as long as it's short.
Now, a survey to an owner is different than a survey to somebody who's on the project reporting to the owner. So how does that go? Do you want a short survey going to the business owner who gets reported to, or are you only dealing with the person who's the immediate contact? So project manager deals with this person at the company. Do they get the survey, or does it go up the chain too?
It depends on how big your chain is, right? And it depends on who's paying you. And then like what kind of questions do you want? So sometimes like if you're dealing with, let's say a director, right? And they're not necessarily, or someone who's the assistant to the director, right? Like a DA, then, you might be asking questions about like how you guys are producing and how you guys, whatever, because they're like, you think about like, what do they care about, right? Like they care about looking good. right? Like, like they care about like looking good, getting promoted, meeting bonus, making sure that their budget's on point, you know, so that their boss. So like you want to tailor your questions towards like, okay, like not like, are we making you look good, but you know, are we performing to standards? Are we meeting your budget? Like you want to kind of measure the expectations. And that's why at the beginning of the onboarding process, it's really important to understand what the expectations of the different players are. Whereas for the boss, like they want to know, you know, they might care more about, you know, like actually, okay, are you playing nice with other vendors or other people that we have in the marketing field, right? Like, you know, so you might be dealing with someone who's doing social media, right? Like, I mean, they might care if you're playing nice with them. They will care, you know, about their ROI. So they're going to be more ROI specific. So you want to be able to match the survey to their expectations. Does that help?
It does. Thanks.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions?
I have another one.
Yeah, go for it.
PITA clients. So sometimes you don't realize that they're a PITA after the engagement starts. So you can set out, here are the expectations, this is what we're going to do for you, and then you find out that you're getting calls and emails, and it's, you know, either from the same person or from multiple people, enough to just drive you crazy. You get to a point where it's like, I want to fire this client. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions to ferret out who is that type of person early on in the engagement?
So you will notice that the behavior of a prospect will usually be pretty much the behavior of a client, right? So how a prospect treats you during the sales cycle will pretty much how they treat you during the engagement. So you can tell from a behavioral standpoint, like who's going to be a PITA client by the way if they're a PITA prospect. So now, unless, you know, I mean, there are some outliers, right? To be able to tell. So like you can qualify them early on whether or not like you want them or not, because you're like, oh man, this person's going to be a PITA. Do I want them or do I not? Right? So that even before you get to the onboarding process, once you're in the onboarding process and you're like, okay, I took them, you're like, I did it. I know they're going to be a PITA. Now, you know, there's a couple of things there. Now it's just about really making sure that your boundaries are like straight jacket tight, right? You want to make sure that if you have a monthly call, you have a monthly call, and that you're not, so they can think everything is an emergency, and they can think that everything is urgent, but you know better. So like, you know, they might be emailing you at 2 a.m. in the morning. You don't have to respond at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right? So,
in fact, when I get emails at night, I just got smart about this a little while ago. Sometimes I do want to respond because I can. It happens to be a good moment. It's 9 o'clock. I'm sitting here with my iPad watching a baseball game. I now delay emails so that, you know, I might want to answer it to take it off my plate for the next morning, but that email will go out at 8:30 in the morning the next day. So I have a scheduler. That helps a lot. But there are some situations where, you know, there's a difference in time zones. And that can get a little complicated because sometimes, you know, the person you're working with, they're available at the end of the day. Their end of the day is, let's say, 5 o'clock. That's 8 o'clock for you. Yeah. So how do you deal with those sort of boundaries over, you know, varying time zones?
So are you saying your freelancers are overseas, or like?
Well, it's both ways. It's both ways.
Okay.
It could be both ways. You can have freelancers who are 6 hours or 8 hours in one direction, clients that are 3 or 4 hours or 8 hours in another direction.
So I think it's important to know what the outwardly communication is to the client, right? So like internally, I mean, you could be emailing all day, every day, to your team. But like knowing like when is appropriate to email the client and having your team understand like what the expectations and boundaries are to email the client, right? So that they're setting up their schedulers, so that client doesn't end up usurping your team as well. Because sometimes what will happen is, you know, like a client who's like really like, they're like, well, you're not answering me, so I'm going to go to your marketing lead and get the answers, right? And so then your marketing lead will end up spending a lot of time with that client and not distributing their time across different clients, right? Because now they're taking up that team member's productivity. So making sure that everyone understands what the communication is outward. Yes.
Wait, hang on. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So what if you have a client who started and you did the welcome and you started your onboarding process, and then they're like, oh, sorry, I need to delay the process for 2 months, or I need to delay the project for 2 months. How would you smoothly re-onboard or make it not feel disjointed, knowing that you may have given them the input forms and like some of the stuff, but just to refresh it, but to acknowledge it's a restart and without feeling like it's everything all over again?
Victoria, what is it that you do?
I'm a marketing consultant.
A marketing consultant. So they're like, what, like I don't have budget till later? Or is it like...
Yeah, like the money had to be deferred to something because one of their clients messed up their budgeting. So it trickles down.
Yeah, so that's that happens. And now it's about, so one, it's about like understanding in your sales process that they're ready to go, right? So like now we can like pinpoint that back to, you know, like where did we not pinpoint it, right? So like that's like, it goes back to the sales process. We didn't pinpoint it. And sometimes it just happens. They're like, oh my God, this, you know, there it goes.
I mean, she was like, I'm good to go, ready to go. And then one of her accounts had to hold back, which is bad. Anyway.
So one of the things that I find very important for marketers is to take some sort of upfront like money, right? So whether you call it a deployment fee, a starting fee, or whatever you want to call it, right? That you take some kind of, you know, start money, because when you just do it based on percentage spend, right? Like now you don't get any money till like 3 months from now, right? So that's like, if it's a 2 month delay, you're not getting paid till the end, right? So like, that's really long. So one is making sure that you get some kind of upfront fee, and that's put into somewhere in your, you know, in your scope, so that you didn't just do all this work to acquire the client.
Right.
And now they're gone basically for 2 months, because when you don't have money, there's no buy-in. So you have to make sure that there's some buy-in, so that they come back. Like, you know, you're able to hold that fee hostage in a way. Like, I mean, I hate that. Right? So, because if not, they're like, bye-bye. And you don't know, you know, and in those 2 months, so many things can happen. You know, their best friend's fiance is a great marketer, you know, and like now they can take over the thing, and there's no, you know, free of charge because he's starting his own business. It'd be a great case study, right? Bye-bye client. So we want to make sure that they come back, and if they don't come back, that at least like we got something for our time spent. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is to just be really clear with the client about what does that mean for production, right? For your production, say like, you know, I may or may not be able to accommodate you in 2 months, right? Or, you know, or I might have to accommodate you in 3 months or whatever. Cause now it's affecting your workflow, right? So that's a conversation to have. Yeah. It's like, what does that really mean in terms of like, it's like, okay, well, I may or may not be able to accommodate you then. And what that looks like.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, guys? We have 10 more minutes.
As far as setting up workflow.
Nina.
Oh,
yes.
As far as setting up a workflow, so do you I mean, there's so many out there. There's Asana, but do you have any preference? Is Trello, I know that Tanya likes Trello. Is there any one that works particularly well or is well suited for an onboarding process, or basically pick one and use it?
Well, first, I put it in whatever project manager you're using. So if you are currently using a project manager, that's the easiest place to put your workflow. If you're currently not using a project manager, then I would highly recommend you start. Are you using something right now?
Well, you see, I am, but I use OmniFocus.
Okay.
But that's not really for groups as much as it is for me.
Yeah, it's an individual, so it's
exactly.
Not,
so I've used Asana. I've not really loved it. So I'm kind of looking for something, and I don't know, maybe it's just Google Docs. I mean, But if you know of an effective platform to use, that would be, I would benefit from knowing that.
Okay. Well, how many clients do you currently manage?
The range could be at any given time, anywhere from 10 to 20 could be active.
Okay, 10 to 20 that are active.
Mm-hmm.
And then are you more of a visual, and then do you have team members helping you with those projects?
In many cases, yes. In some cases, no.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So you need something that's collaborative, that you can, do you care about seeing across different clients? Because at that level, I would highly suggest that you start seeing across different clients so you can see where they're at.
See, that's the thing. I mean, I use Slack, and I keep individual channels set up because at least that keeps all the communication for a particular project in one place. I kind of like that. I don't use it as a social network for business. I use it in that manner. But I'm trying not to get too many things. I mean, if there's some way of being able to have a project manager and maybe connecting it to a Slack channel, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
So I want everything in one place. I don't want, this group that might be working on this project to get confused with this other group that's working on a completely different project, even though some members may be working on both.
Yeah. So Slack is really good for communication. It also integrates with a lot of different project managers. I would consider, just because of the volume that you have and what you're doing, either looking at Teamwork, Red Booth, or Rike.
I've heard of Reich.
They're all about the same price point, because you have a lot more clients. Like if you had less volume, then I would recommend something like an Asana or a Trello, but you have a little bit more volume, and it would be good for you to be able to see across the different clients. Now, if you're not gonna, use it for project management, which I'll let Tanya handle that, then Asana or Trello would be fine to put your workflow in.
Mm-hmm.
But because I would highly recommend you start using a project manager because that'll make your life easier.
I've used Asana. I just don't love I love the way it works, but
Yeah. What don't you love about Asana?
I don't know. I just find the interface a little clunky.
Yeah. Okay. You might like Teamwork. Teamwork has a nice UI, so I would check that out.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Juliana, why don't you go over, because I know a lot of these members are thinking about having a VA. What would you consider a scorecard for a VA beyond them completing something?
A scorecard for a VA. For a virtual assistant who's going to, just in general for a VA, or what do you mean?
Think about something, for example, maybe they're updating their sales or managing something. What are the questions that you should be thinking about, even if there's no results, for creating a scorecard?
Okay, so when we're creating a scorecard, I always think about it as the first thing that I think about is, what are the tasks that are helping to move my business forward, right? So just from a high level, and then bringing it low, as opposed to just throwing stuff at a scorecard, which you can, but it's not usually that helpful. So first it's what what is it that is, pushing my business forward? So if it's if they're helping you actually, optimize a AdWords campaign, I'm going to use that as an example, then, we would think about, okay, what's helping to push our business forward are the results for that campaign, right? Because the results mean that that's going to be a happier client. So then what do those results look like, right? What are they actually responsible for? So, because we don't want to say, okay, we're going to give that person, a score around lead acquisition. They have nothing to do with lead acquisition, right? In terms of your business. So really thinking about, okay, how do I now match what it is that I want for the business with what they're responsible for? And then going deeper into that. All right. So let's say then results, then are they responsible for impressions? Or once they optimize a campaign, or are they responsible for, the cost per lead, or
let's just keep it simple. Like, let's just say like how you're using your virtual assistant, right? Like updating the sales, following up with them. So how are you keeping your score? Because a lot of people here are using the virtual assistants in that, like following up and updating information or doing mundane things.
For lead generation, you mean?
Yeah, but you're using your virtual assistant, like in the sale and like following up the sales contact, putting their information in. Like, how are you keeping score of that?
Yeah, so for me, it's so I currently have my assistant on using Streak, right? And so what I'm keeping track of is, okay, so I'm like, okay, so for me right now, since I'm doing lead generation, the most important metric for me is like how many sales calls I have per week. Right? So I'm measuring like sales calls per week. And then also making sure that depending on how many people actually connected with us, that she's scheduling, right? So what's the conversion between, or what's the lag, like how many days are going from how many, let's say, people responding to her responding back, right? So we want to think about things that are measurable and quantifiable. So something could be along like how many days, days and lag, like that's something, and for a lot of people that I know that are owners up who use VAs that are international, right? So then we start thinking, okay, like if you're spending more than, right, let's say a day or a cycle, right? Because my morning, her evening, her like that's not a good thing, because that means that like I'm lagging in a hot lead. Like a lead could be really, really hot and they can go cold because we're not spending time responding, right? So days is important. Scheduling people is important. Making sure that the scorecard and that all of the output is quantifiable and I'm able to see it. Streak or any sort of CRM that you have should be able to do reporting. So you should be able to get these things out. If you're using something that isn't doing reporting, then you want them to be able to, something like this nature, like create a Google Sheet where they're putting in information on a weekly basis so you can see it. The most important thing is that they're getting the numbers.
And are you informing the VA of the report, your virtual assistant of the report, so she knows she's on track?
Does she know she's on track? Well, we just instituted a new system, so I have to do that this week. But yes, every single time that I institute a new system and it's up and running, then like, yes, they know that they're on track, because like we're able to see like, okay, what is it, like what's acceptable and what's not, right? So like there's always going to be targets. So whenever I'm thinking about delegating to somebody, I'm thinking about, okay, what are the targets, right? Like what's the goal? Like, why are they doing this? What are the targets? And then what's the completion indicator, right? So the completion indicator for, schedule calls is that it's on my schedule, like, that they know that it's confirmed and it's on my schedule. For something as like responses, it's that, they went into LinkedIn and the responses were put in there, right? So always knowing like what that end outcome is.
So you're doing it based on time. That's how you're measuring it. Got it.
So time and numbers, right? Now, sometimes so here's something else that's pretty interesting. When you think about scorecards, a lot about it is like, it's performance, but it's also developing skill sets and habits, right? So right now, I would, for her, I would say like, okay, I want to know X amount of like calls get scheduled per week, right? So let's say it's 3 calls get scheduled per week just to start off with, because she's just starting. 3 months from now, it might be, 10 calls get scheduled per week. And later on, it might be the conversion, right? So we're saying, okay, well, like, what are we doing to improve the conversions on this, right? So like now we're talking about like not only time and absolute measurements, but then we're also talking about percentages.
Got it. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, Juliana. And then, yeah, guys, have a great week. See you virtually.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Juliana.
All right.